Hi everyone, welcome. It is always so nice to see so many familiar faces and so many new faces. So thank you so much for joining us at tonight's event, Innovating for Social Equity, Anchoring Economic Growth in Chicago. I'm Carolyn Grossman. I'm Executive Director of Chicago Booth's Restandi Center for Social Sector Innovation, the social impact hub here at Chicago Booth at the business school, and I'm also an adjunct associate professor at Booth. This year, the Restandi Center is celebrating our 10th anniversary as the social impact hub at Booth, and we are here for people committed to tackling complex social and environmental problems. I am myself a Booth alum. I am celebrating my 20th reunion year this year. The center is celebrating its 10th anniversary, which means that it was not here when I was a student, and there's really nothing, maybe my kids aren't here, so maybe them, but other than them, there's really nothing that I am more proud of than that this center exists. And I assure you they're not streaming this event. So in any case, we're really an integral part of the university's social impact and entrepreneurship ecosystems. We promote research, we hold programs, we support courses, all events like this, all that come together to really help make the world a better place. We launched the Innovating for Social Equity series to examine a central question. With billions spent by public, private, nonprofit organizations, why do profound disparities still exist? That's really the core of the question that exists. And previous sessions in the Innovating for Social Equity series have examined the role of philanthropy, private market investors, entrepreneurs, impact investors, global business leaders in addressing social inequity. This evening's conversation is particularly timely in that we are here in between celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. Day and Black History Month is ahead of us. So this series is an important part of how we address racial and economic diversity here in the city of Chicago and beyond. So I'm delighted to have three outstanding corporate leaders as panelists today as we look at the role of our business sector here in Chicago as part of the question of social equity. So we are joined by Roger Hochschild, the CEO and president of Discover, by Gil Quinones, the CEO of ComEd, and by Scott Santi, chairman and CEO of Illinois Toolworks. We're especially fortunate to have our moderator here, Derek Douglas, my former colleague, but still my colleague because you're an executive in residence at the Restandi Center. But Derek is president of the Civic Committee and Commercial Club of Chicago and Civic and Economic Impact executive in residence at the Restandi Center. And Derek, I said my former colleague because he was most recently the vice president for civic engagement and external affairs at the University of Chicago. And prior to that, served on the White House Domestic Policy Council and special assistant to President Barack Obama for urban affairs. Many thanks to Derek for helping to put tonight's panel together. We greatly appreciate that you're here, and we are going to turn it over to Derek in just a few minutes, but I wanted to let everyone know that we will have plenty of time for questions, so please do, if you have questions, we'll be circulating a microphone to ask questions live. So with that, I will turn it over to Derek and our speakers. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, first of all, thank you all for being with us this evening. I'm really excited about the panel that we're going to have and the conversation we're going to have. I got to thank Caroline first and the Restandi Center, as she mentioned. For 10 years before I came to the Civic Committee, I was at the University of Chicago, and my job was to think about ways in which the university could have impact in the city. And I would say that one of our strongest partners within the university was the Restandi Center, and the leadership of Caroline and others there has been tremendous. I think tonight's panel is just an example. What we're going to talk about tonight is this idea of anchoring development in the neighborhoods and in the communities in Chicago. And I think it's a really important topic. It's one that I'll tell you that we at the Civic Committee have been thinking about, and Roger and Scott, who are on the Civic Committee, Gil as well, have been helpful to us in thinking about ways in which the business community can get more engaged. When a lot of people think about anchor institutions, you traditionally think about the eds and the meds. You know, we were at the University of Chicago anchoring the South Side, Rush on the West Side. They're there, they're not going anywhere, they're big employers, they're big economic engines. But I think what we have tonight, and what we're going to hear about tonight, is an increasing energy, excitement, and movement around corporations looking at this idea of how they can also be anchors in neighborhoods on the South and the West sides of Chicago. And what is the role of companies to also play that role? What are some of the unique challenges and opportunities that they see? Caroline did reference the inequities that we have in Chicago, and I think I'd be remiss if we didn't point out that when you look at what's happening around economic opportunity in the South and West sides versus other parts of the city, it does tell a tale of two stories. With some of the work we've been doing at the Civic Committee, we were looking at this question of jobs and job opportunities in the South and West sides. And one of the consultants working with us looked at the top 20 cities in America in terms of population. And Chicago ranked 19th out of 20th in terms of the disparity between the unemployment rate for whites versus the unemployment rate for black and brown people. And if you just looked at the black unemployment rate, Chicago had the highest unemployment rate among the top 20 cities, and on Latino was second highest. So the reality is, in Chicago, we have challenges that we have to really address, and the government can't do it alone, universities can't do it alone, nonprofits can't do it alone, the corporate sector, the business sector is a critical part, and it takes all of us working together. So that's what we're going to get into tonight, and I want to just thank the three of you for accepting on the first phone call that you would be here with us tonight. So why don't we start with a question for each of you, and in speaking to it, if you could both introduce yourself, but also describe a little bit about your story and your company's story and your efforts to anchor economic growth in the neighborhoods that you've partnered with. And we'll start right on my left with you, Roger.
Sure. So Roger Hochschild, very excited to be here with you guys this evening and looking forward to the questions. You know, for Discover, we're up in Riverwoods. And so traditionally have not done much in the city. But starting in 2019, I had been thinking about the corporate site selection process and how it perpetuates systemic bias. And it isn't that companies say we're not going to put headquarters in black and brown neighborhoods, but that's what happens, right? Companies will say, well, we want to go somewhere with the best infrastructure, with the best schools. Well, that means somewhere with a very high tax base and property values. And so companies all around the country make the same decisions, right? You look at Amazon, right? For those of you who know DC, they should have put their headquarters in Anacostia, right? Or somewhere that really needed those jobs, but they didn't. And so what really sort of kicked me over the edge, I went and heard Ibram Kendi speak about how to be an anti-racist. I thought about how lucky I was to have the platform I do, and I said, okay, that's it. We're going to put a call center, because that's what we do at Discover. We have great call centers here in the US. We're going to put a call center somewhere on the south or west side of Chicago, and opened a center down in Chatham.
Wonderful. Gil?
Yeah. Gil Quinones with ComEd. I started in November of 2021. I come from New York City. ComEd, we power the lives of citizens and residents of Northern Illinois. Think of our southern border as about 100 miles south of Chicago. We go all the way up to Wisconsin and Iowa. It's about 11,400 square miles, 70% of the population of our state, about 9.4 million residents. The ultimate place-based company. We are literally connected to every home and businesses.
Any complaints?
So we are very much engaged in our neighborhoods and communities, but especially now because of the energy transition that's happening, the move towards renewable energy, the move towards electrification of everything, whether it's transportation, buildings, and homes. We now really play a bigger role. The question is, how do we do that so that there is, we don't create the energy haves and have-nots along this energy transition? And ComEd has been laser focused on that job. Our state passed a very progressive, I would say nation-leading climate law in September of 2021 called the Climate Equitable Jobs Act. And in that law, we are required to have 40% of our benefits go to equity investment eligible communities, basically communities that are environmental justice communities that are historically under resource and disadvantage from the perspective of climate change. About a week ago, we filed our 5-year grid investment plan and our rate plan to our regulators, the Illinois Commerce Commission. And in that plan, you will see very clearly that we are making our grid investments to prepare the grid in this energy transition, all of our energy efficiency, STEM, workforce development, supplier diversity, to make sure that they are targeted towards under-resourced and disadvantaged communities. So, interested in talking more about
we'll
that.
get more into that. Scott?
Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Scott Santee with a company called ITW. Anybody heard of ITW? Well, I'm shocked. That's great. We are a 110-year-old company founded here in Chicago, and currently have a global manufacturing business with roughly 50,000 people throughout the world. I would say, and I've been there for my entire career, which is almost 40 years now, and one of the things that I've always appreciated is the company's always had a really strong ethos around giving back. And for most of my career, that was really embodied in the sort of standard corporate philanthropy, sort of using our resources to invest and support organizations doing great work. And I would say that about a decade ago, we started to become a little less than fully satisfied with that work, only because we weren't involved enough from the standpoint of actually seeing impact through. We were making investments in, again, great organizations, but ultimately didn't have a direct stake in a lot of that work. And so our thinking started to evolve in terms of how we could at least take some decent component of that investment and really direct it in areas where we could leverage our economic ecosystem for good, as opposed to investing. We started with an investment in a STEM high school on the west side that was that today is producing 250 high school graduates, 96% of whom are first-time college entrants, and about 96-97% are going on to college from there. So that was sort of our initial anchor on the west side. And really the idea we're working now is to see if we can't, again, leverage our economic ecosystem as a company in ways where we can focus some of that investment around not just education, but now manufacturing actually on the west side. Can we stimulate, can we put some of our own jobs in there? Can we stimulate a supplier base around those manufacturing jobs? And we could sort of talk some more about what form that's taking at some point, but essentially have committed $40 million to buying a building and ultimately and building out that ecosystem over the next 5 years.
So we're going to get into each of the projects in a little bit greater detail, but I want us to first see if you can, I'll start with you again, Roger, take us behind the curtain of what's involved with making a decision like this? I would have to presume, I don't know how many call centers you have across the U.S., but to make a decision of making that kind of placement, it's a big decision, involves many people within the company. Did you face resistance to make this move? What was your thought process, and what did you have to do to kind of position your employees, your board, to say we're going to go all in this kind of way?
Yeah. So it was a bit of a counterintuitive decision because we didn't need a new call center. We actually had one in Columbus, Ohio that was about 50% occupancy. We were already starting, I mean, even prior to the pandemic, about 25% of the agents were working from home. So that part was a bit counterintuitive. I just said this was something we were going to do, and was convinced that it would work out and be the right thing. And then people would push variations, right? Well, there's a lot of great real estate in River North. But I think part of the vision was, I think only large companies can bring jobs at scale into the community. And there's a big difference between employing from the community and bringing the jobs there in terms of the work-life balance and commutes your employees have, but also in stimulating greater economic activity. And so when I was down for the announcement, I met a woman who ran a nail salon across the street. She was really excited that we were going to bring 1,000 people right across from her nail salon. Yeah, we're working with over 20 local restaurants who had never done business with a big company, but we provide lunch every day for the employees and made our provider Sodexo work with the local restaurants. And so that was the vision. Took a while to get everyone on board. I would say for the board of directors, they did not ask once what it cost. They were enthusiastic from the beginning. We've already had a board meeting down there and they were all really excited. So I think sometimes these decisions look riskier than they are. And I think, I like to say, and it's really true, we have benefited as a company so much more than Chatham. It's an honor for us to be in that community.
Do you think, just to follow up, that, and speak a little bit to the success of the call center, because there's this notion of this was great that Discover did it, it's a nice charitable thing, giving back, but maybe not as much of an understanding as how it affected you from a business perspective. So speak to that, and given the way things have turned out, is it something you would look at doing maybe in other places, or is it a one-off type of thing?
Sure. So we are probably the only major bank with 100% US-based customer service. That's always been part of our model. We invest very, very heavily in call centers. And even in this day of mobile devices, you've all had that experience when you fall off the happy path and there is no one there to help you. And if you,
Yes.
our Discover customers,
That's more on the first call when you're trying to get through that
there will
robot.
be someone helpful right there, and so it's important. The Chatham Center is performing on par with all of our other centers, exactly even, which is amazing given how new it is, other than in attrition, and attrition is about 40% less. And so that really drives your cost structure because you have less training. So it's a huge business success for us, and I think reflects the fact, you need to think differently about how you do business. I'm part of the corporate coalition and working with other companies. You just have to forget everything you've learned and be willing and committed. And it was on one hand a very easy decision because I was that confident in the talent of the people we'd find. And we've seen broader benefits. I was talking with an engineer who joined Discover over another company because she wanted to work for a company that actually was doing things and driving change. She isn't working in Chatham, she's working in Riverwoods, but she picked us over a very competitive offer from a tech company. So it's really transformed our thoughts around diversity, equity, inclusion, and it's now our model. So in Columbus, we've moved our center to an economically disadvantaged area outside of Columbus. And we're doing the same thing. We're looking for the right location in Phoenix. We'll be moving our center to probably an economically disadvantaged Latino community in Phoenix. And this will be part of our model in terms of how we do business.
Great. Gil, so you have a project that you're working on in Bronzeville. I saw Bruce Montgomery here somewhere. I don't know if he's still here. There he is in the back, who was the first person to introduce me to it. Can you talk a little bit more specifically about it, and also touch on how you engage the community and the engagement process to both socialize them to what you wanted? How's that partnership going? Any challenges there or successes?
Will do. So about 10 minutes from here in Bronzeville, ComEd helped develop what's called a microgrid, which is a grid for the community, so that just in case, which is probably not going to happen, just in case our grid goes down, that neighborhood can be powered up and sustain itself. And we did it by integrating renewable energy. So for example, the Dearborn Homes, which is part of the Chicago Housing Authority, put solar panels. There's battery storage in the area. We also put, for now, a modular natural gas generation system to support that microgrid, and a very sophisticated communication and control system so that microgrid can interact with the bigger ComEd grid. Right from the beginning, the development of that microgrid was really done not just from a ComEd engineering top-down, but a lot of input from the members of the community in Bronzeville. We created an advisory council. Bruce is a member of the advisory council, and we really discovered that frontline community members have excellent ideas on what they need. So for example, we put in smart street lighting, and that was a request, a feedback from the community. Last mile electric vehicle, there's a nursing home close by, and they wanted to be able to go to the grocery and the pharmacy. And so we were experimenting last mile electric vehicle transportation. Charging station for multifamily homes, so that when individuals purchase electric vehicles, that they have readily accessible charging station. STEM programs with the high school in the community. And all of the contractors that we work with to build this microgrid, we, just like what Scott has done, we require them to hire from individuals within the community. Now the engineering side of this is also pretty cool, because nearby is the Illinois Institute of Technology, and they have their own microgrid for their campus. And we develop we call microgrid controller, basically a brain that make both microgrids talk to each other seamlessly and share resources. And that's very novel. It's replicable. So we're trying to recreate this model now in Rockford. So we're calling it part of our community of the future. But what's really interesting, Derek, is the input from the community. And it's ongoing. This advisory council is still up and going, because it's really become a test bed for technologies on how you create this microgrid, incorporate green and clean technologies, bring in, again, STEM workforce development, bring in suppliers that are local based and diverse suppliers. And we think that it's a model that we can do in various communities within our service territory.
Are there things that you all changed, or maybe you weren't thinking about doing, and then you added them based on the engagement with the community and what you heard?
The smart street lighting, the last mile electric vehicle.
That was not part of it.
That was not part of what we were thinking. The STEM program, hiring individuals in the community from our suppliers and contractors to build the microgrid. A lot of those came from us input from the community.
That's great. So that's a really good model to have that advisory
Yeah.
working with you. Scott, talk a little bit about your model, because yours is different from the two of theirs, because you're doing something in Austin, you're bringing someone from out of state. Can you talk a little bit about your model of engaging, of what you're doing in the neighborhood and how it's distinctive?
Well, what I would say first of all is we're pretty early in terms
Yeah.
of the state. So I think one of the things that we ultimately concluded as we were looking for how we were going to go about trying to do similar things to what these two gentlemen, their companies are doing, was that we had to really get in. That there's no way we were going to figure out from outside looking in exactly what this needed to look like, but ultimately we had to put some of our own sort of economic skin in the game, which is really where we are. We also, it had to also be very much linked to needs that the company had. So we had some capacity that we were going to need to add in certain areas. We had some suppliers that we were looking to add some capacity. And so what we basically did was ask them to come to Austin and add that capacity in Austin instead of outside of Detroit, which is where they're serving us today. So, depending on who you read and what studies you read, manufacturing jobs have either a 5 or 7 to 1 multiplier in terms of the direct jobs versus all the tail, sort of supplier jobs in terms of, as you create more incomes, then just like Roger was talking about the nail salon, so we're trying to get the sort of critical mass going and trying to bring enough sort of initial economic commerce to have some level of critical mass, but ultimately our looking at this as an 8 to 10 year haul before we have it sort of really up and running in an effective way. But I would say, similar to what Gil just said, we also think this is a model that we can hopefully sort of refine and then apply elsewhere over time.
Did the city play a role in partnering with you? Were they key? Were they helpful? Not helpful? This is off the record, right?
Yeah. Well, not seeing the roster of the audience. I'd say this. As a company, we are typically not a company that's looking for incentives. We're not looking to sort of do things on the backs of taxpayers. There's plenty of other situations where they're very needed and very effective. And so, at this point, the early investments we've made has really been on a building, on some infrastructure around that building, using local contractors, helping this supplier, locate assets and come into the community. So it's not that we asked the government for something and they didn't do what we needed. It was just, I think at this stage, we felt like we could at least get from point A to point B without a lot of.
Is that the same for the two of you, or was the city really instrumental?
The city's been a good partner. In many cases in our project, we need to get permits to build the various type of infrastructure. In the west side, we actually, another way that we try and impact, one of our suppliers located in North Lawndale, the Will Group, and they create the grid equipment that we install in our electric grid, and they assemble it there. They also do street lighting, but it's great because they employ about 120, 130 assemblers. It's not a manufacturing, but it's system integration and assembling of grid equipment, and right there in K-Town and North Lawndale, and we I think that has had an impact.
So this is a question. I want to start with you, Roger. I'd like everyone to speak to it. We have the three of you here. You're kind of telling the story of your companies, which are exemplars. And one might think in the audience we could fill a room with CEOs telling similar stories, but we can't. In some respects, you all are kind of the exception more than the rule. And could you speak to why is that the case? And two, if you were sitting with another CEO, what would you tell them to try to convince them or make them think differently about getting more involved? How do we get more companies to do something similar to what the three of you are doing?
Yeah. So for me, I think sometimes as CEO, you just need to make the decision, and so it was easy. But we've gotten a lot of other interest from companies, and I've given tours for CEOs. We're trying to actively bring people down because you can tell them. There's nothing like seeing it. The energy you get, you've been there, right? I mean, it just is really exciting. And then you tell also the business story. And every company has their DE&I efforts. They're making loans, but this was something tangible. And I think Scott's point of it's got to be part of the business. You don't want it something you're doing at the side. You get so much more of an impact if it's really core to your business. And so for us, we're going to continue telling the story, inviting people down, showing them. We've worked very closely with Deputy Mayor Samir Mayakar, and offered to work with him if there are other people he wants to bring in. So that's how our goal is to inspire as many other people as we can, because I'd love to get to the point where there's too much competition for the workforce down there. I think we have a ways to go.
But wouldn't you, in an ideal world, because you're kind of the one company there now, was the idea you were going to go, you were going to anchor, but is the goal or the hope to have other companies follow and start to build an ecosystem? Have you been recruiting companies to try to come down, or it's more just showing your model and they can do what they want with it?
Gosh, I wish I needed an ecosystem. That sounds so cool. I don't know. We're happy. We got our neighbors in Chatham.
We got that at the Shed Aquarium.
Yeah, gosh. No, we got the nail salon. We got some good restaurants. Everything is fine. So we have everything we need. It's going to be a great center. We're going to have 1,000 people. It was originally just going to be a call center. We now have HR jobs there. We've stood up 3 technology teams and are very excited to create more and more technology jobs and promote folks from our call center or working with Chicago State. So I think it's really more, this is a problem that requires the business community to work together collectively. I think it's one of the great things about Chicago is how tight the business community is and how well we work together. So we just want to encourage as many companies as we can.
Scott, on that topic, could you speak a little bit to, Scott, in addition to being CEO of ITW, he was actually the chair of the Civic Committee, which is a large organization of CEOs. Could you speak a little bit to the business diversity effort that was kind of your brainchild that's been going?
I thought you were going to talk about the fact that I recruited you out of Chicago.
Well, Caroline said I'm not allowed to go there.
I've done all the mea culpas with the Chicago people.
I see some of my team as well, some of my OC team there, so that's a sore spot. We'll go to the positive of what's been happening at the Civic Committee, and what do you see as the energy around getting more companies to take this on?
Yeah, the Civic Committee is an organization of the CEOs of the top, 90 employers in the city, give or take. And the simple idea is that, all of our companies have supplier diversity programs in one form or another. A lot of people doing some good work. Most of us probably a little bit frustrated in terms of the pace and progress. And so the idea is, that we're actively working is if we can coordinate sort of spend amongst our membership in ways that allow us to be more targeted and focused about where we're going to develop supplier diversity, that we can do more collectively than our companies can do individually. And I think that's, I think we've proven the point in terms of data. We're now in the execution phase. The thing I would say that I think also applies to the broader question that you're asking about why more people aren't doing this is I do believe this is we got to be driving permanent change, not sort of feel good short-term change. And so I think these sorts of models need some seasoning, right? We got to be patient enough so that it's not, it's just not a new neat thing. It's 4 or 5 years in. Given that ecosystem around these investments starts to develop, and I think it becomes a more fully fleshed, sort of change in how we think about doing business. And so I just think I think the lean in continues to elevate, but it's also not going to be a quick fix. It's not going to be we got to be committed to this
For the long
forever. Yeah.
Well, when I was at the University of Chicago, I often used the term mutual benefit. And the idea was when we were doing our engagement, our activities, I always said we need to be able to tell the narrative as to how both the community and the university as an institution gained from whatever the initiative or the effort was. If it was only one direction, then it's, it's a kindness of your heart thing. It's not sustainable.
Either way, right?
It's
Yeah.
got to be the mutual, and that's kind of what you're getting at. Now, we do have some students here, and so I wanted to just shift a little bit, and Gil, come to you, because in addition to all the great work you guys are doing and with your companies and the model you're setting, you're, I think, emblematic of the kind of leadership that we want to see in Chicago. Is there a story, Gil, from your past, a moment that really helped prepare you to lead in the way you're doing now, and that you could share with some of the students who are about to get on the same business journeys that you guys have been on?
So the first 16 years of my career I spent at the cousin of ComEd. It's Con Ed, Consolidated Edison Company of New York, in New York
That's
City.
brilliant, Brandon.
But so I've always been in the utility, but after 9/11, I had the opportunity to work for Mayor Michael Bloomberg as his energy and telecom advisor to help rebuild New York City after 9/11. And that was really a life-changing experience for me. I lived 2 miles north of Ground Zero. So being part of that, and when you work in local government, in government, local, state, you get to do a lot of things that really impact people's lives. You don't get paid anything, right? But it was so energizing. I got involved in redesigning the solid waste management plan of New York City to redistribute the waste transfer stations so that they're not concentrated in environmental justice communities and communities of color. That was a great project. We tried to attract the Olympics, 2012 Olympics. We lost to London, but it was a great exercise because it became the basis for the rezoning of the various parts of New York City. The waterfront, now Williamsburg and Brooklyn is one of the hottest places. And it was all part of that Olympic planning process that created all the rezoning. And so after that, I worked for the New York Power Authority before I came here. That's a state-owned, the largest state-owned electric utility in the U.S. So I also got the experience from the state level on how do you impact communities and neighborhoods. So if I have one advice, I know you're in business school, try and have a stint in either local or state government, and before going back to the private sector, it was a life-changing event for me.
I would concur. I worked in the White House before, and it is. To Roger and Scott, if you could speak, and then we're going to have to break for students to leave, and we'll open up to questions. What one piece of advice? You have students here, but you also have leaders of many of the great civic organizations. I'm looking at Brian Fabes, who got the Corporate Coalition going, and Haven. What would one piece of advice be you would give to leaders who value economic inclusion and want to kind of follow the lead that you all have been on that journey of advancing economic inclusion in Chicago? Go ahead.
Roger,
why don't you start?
I think it's something, Scott said it first, but I'll reinforce it. Make it central to your business, right? Don't, there are a lot of companies making loans and or making donations. And in reality, I think about how great would our economy be, right? Any business person would say, how great would our economy be if everyone participated fully, right? It would just be amazing. You think about what the region would look like, the growth we would have, and then you say, okay, well, what can we do to help that? And approach it as a business problem that you're going to pursue as aggressively as anything else that you focus on, and that you're not going to take no for an answer. You're going to be creative, you're going to be innovative. To Brian's point, you're going to think differently. It's business unusual. And the benefits are amazing, and ones you never imagined. I'll give you guys one silly story. Every big company has a corporate catalog, which is their branded merch, right? So a Discover t-shirt or a mug or a million different things. And so I got a call from the woman who runs our Chatham Center saying, you know, the corporate catalog is racist. I was like, well, wait a second. And you look at it, and it looks like everything you would see at a Lake Forest golf course pro shop, right? It's everyone's favorite brand. It's got your Land's End, you got little Johnny O. And she said, where's the streetwear? I was like, oh, that's a good point. So we're now working with 3 Chatham designers on a totally different look for the Discover catalog. And you know, going down to Chatham, white executives at Discover can have the experience their black colleagues have every day of being the only one like them in the room, being a little worried about, am I dressed the right way? Did I shake hands the right way? What's going on? And so, you know, you can transform your company. You just need to make the decision and then just go for it.
Scott, do you have anything there?
I think those are terrific points. You know, maybe the only thing I would add is that I think part of the conviction that drives us is the fact that ultimately economics, access to economic opportunity is essentially the vehicle that most of what we believe to be society's problems get solved, right? It's education or it's access to, you know, equitable access. And so I think from the standpoint of this idea of long-term commitment to permanent change, it is so fundamentally critical to, you know, we talk about the crime problem in the city, a whole myriad of issues, I think that all, you know, in the end are in some way impacted by lack of access to, you know, sort of the full economic, you know,
Absolutely.
opportunities that exist in this incredible country.
Absolutely, and in Chicago, that's, you know, that is so apropos what you said. So we're going to start opening it up now to questions from the audience. I know that some students are going to have to peel away. We really appreciate you being here. And so if people have questions, raise your hand. There's a microphone that they have, and we can direct the question to the panel. Who wants to open it up? There's one here, and then we come to you, Daniel.
We don't get questions, we start asking them questions.
I think you'll get some. This is a talkative group.
Hi,
Go ahead.
everyone. I'm wondering, you know, different communities have different needs. And I'm wondering, when you opened up businesses in disadvantaged communities, do you find that you had to change certain policies or procedures or benefits offered to reflect the needs of those communities? So I'm thinking about things like shift scheduling or transit or childcare or employee training and education. Anything like that need to be changed to reflect the needs of the communities?
A lot had to change. But the benefits are the same, right? The employees there get the same health care I do. A lot of it had to do with the recruiting strategy and how traditionally you've thought about talent. And what the recruiters would say is every employee, every prospect who applies, we don't look to disqualify them, we look to qualify them. We look for, do they have skills that are close to what we're looking for? And we've had great partnerships with workforce development groups. You know, I think the key, the woman who runs the center, Watis, grew up in Roseland. And a lot of our managers we hired, you know, you need people from the community, and you can't just come in with what has worked elsewhere, because what has worked elsewhere has been developed and optimized in other communities. So, you know, how you recruit for talent, the channels you use. But the best advice we got is, you know, be asked into the community, be humble, and learn. And so I think by leveraging local leaders, we've adapted those things we needed to. But you know, a lot of other things though haven't had to change, and so schedules are the same. You know, we picked a location near transportation because it was a Target. There's a lot of parking, so that works out really well. We started offering lunch for free. Hadn't done that in other centers. We do have more people working in the center versus from home, because not all of the employees have either the broadband. They have reliable power. Everyone has that. That you get. That everyone has. They may not have broadband or a location. So, but again, I think it's that test, learn, and there's some ideas that we'll bring back to other centers that we've perfected in Chatham.
Dan, I think.
Good evening, Danny Cervantes with Skills. I wanted to build upon a question that Derek asked earlier. As you're out in different platforms, circles, talking to corporate leaders, Roger, you talked about hosting leaders at the Chatham office. So open question to all, but what has resonated with them when you share your stories? And where it has not resonated, what's the sort of obstacles, things that they have to stomach that in order to make it come to fruition has been somewhat of a, we'll call it a blocker, an opportunity?
In our case, just like Roger, we've been bringing other utilities and other regulators to Bronzeville because we're a regulated company. Utilities are regulated companies, and we are able to demonstrate, I think Derek pointed this out, that it's not only good for the community, it's actually good for all of our customers. And the kind of regulatory construct and rules that can be put in place to make that happen. So we do that, and now we can, as I've said, we're replicating this in Rockford and hopefully more places. And going back on workforce development, in our case in Chicago, we really, for our utility, it's ideal if we recruit our line workers from where or close to where they live. And what's happening in our company right now is that people will go to our line workers school, but after 3 to 5 years, they get enough credentials, they move out to the suburbs. And so Chicago is becoming a funnel. So one thing we're doing very differently is we are providing extra training. There are climbing schools or extra tutorial or test preparation. We have some aptitude tests, and we recruit from the schools in the community. I'll give you an example. A line worker for ComEd, a starting salary is $80,000 a year. Wow. You only need a high school education. You have to pass the aptitude test, and you have to be physically fit to be able to do the job. But it's a great pathway to to economic self-sufficiency for many families. And so we're really working now with, we have a workforce development center with the Kennedy King Community College, Dawson Tech. We have our own training center on the south side also, but we're working a lot with CPS schools and community colleges to bring in the utility workforce of the future, because we're going to need people who know how to install and maintain solar panels, how to install and maintain charging stations for electric vehicles. We're going to need people who know how to install heat pumps in homes and buildings. So we are very much, along with other partners, private sector partners, creating that funnel. And it's good business for us that our line workers and utility workers work and live close to where they work.
Another question. We have a couple up here. Okay, let's come on this side right here. Right there. Okay, go ahead.
All right.
You got
Josh.
the mic. You asked the question. That's how it works, right?
So I'm Josh with Go Architect, and one of the questions I had was, with, like, for instance, Gil, you mentioned some of the innovations that you put in this test project with electric vehicles and the microgrid, which we've seen in some other parts of the country. And then with a call center, there's obviously a lot of operational excellence that needs to go into that. So with these projects, is the innovation that they're in the location that they're in, or are there kind of other innovations that need to come together to make that happen? I hope that question makes sense, but I guess how much of it is pushing the boundary on your actual business or technology versus pushing the boundary just because it's in XYZ location?
You want to start?
I mean, in our case, it's definitely the latter, not the former. You know, it's being able to replicate things we're doing in other communities quite successfully in these underinvested communities. So it is, and that requires a fair amount of innovation. I'm sure these gentlemen could speak to that, but there's a lot of things that need to be learned to be able to effectively operate. Where you want to get, I think this is true for all of us, is that you've got a facility that sits on equal footing with any other operation you have in the country. We are just tapping a different employee base. We're tapping a different set of resources where a lot of what we rely on often in other communities is not readily available. So I think that's, the innovation is how to operate world class in areas where you don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the same workforce to start out with. So you have to innovate, in my opinion, in terms of doing different things there. But ultimately, they've got to stand on the same, we have customers that we have to serve. And as Roger, I think, said really well, this is, whether they call Chatham or they call, I forget where else, it has to be the same experience,
Great question. This gentleman here, they're right there, yeah. And then we'll come over here next.
Hi, my name is Riley Melton. I'm a first-year Master of Public Policy student at the Harris School of Public Policy. And this question can be opened up to all three of you. How do you envision future community development initiatives in, whether that be Bronzeville, Austin, or in Chatham, benefiting from your respective companies' presence in the community?
It's like the catalytic effect.
Yeah, I mean, at least for us, it's sort of the broader economic activity. And again, I'm really passionate about jobs in the community. And so we're strengthening the suppliers. One of our big success stories was around the build out and using local minority-owned businesses. And we thought we were doing a good job. We were ahead of all the metrics the city wanted, and then we got yelled at by one of the aldermen who said, this is not a minority community, this is a black community. How many Chatham black companies are you working with? And so we helped some electrical suppliers get the certifications needed to do the low voltage. They'll be able to translate that into other, now I can use the ecosystem word. Oh, this is exciting, right? We're building an ecosystem. And so I think others will benefit from that. And I was at one of the elementary schools talking to the principal, and she said, she can already see a difference in the kids whose parents now work at the center. And to Scott's point, I do think jobs and participating in the economy is the key to solving virtually every woe that we have in these communities.
Just a small add-on to that is I think it's all a momentum play. It's all,
Yeah.
we're trying to build up,
I think so.
almost from zero, some level of, sort of re-engagement and economic activity that as those models mature, then I think that momentum continues to grow.
Yeah. And in our case, for example, we are putting fiber optic communication system on top of our grid anyway to make it smarter. But what we're doing now is we're starting in areas where there is lack of broadband, because we don't need all of the capacity of the fiber. So we can lease the excess capacity to an ISP provider or telecom company to provide that last mile broadband. So that's one way that we impact with our investments.
Great. Let's come on this side. Yes.
Thank you for all the great example you gave today. I do have a question. We see more and more also companies looking at changing their HR policy, for example, to enabling volunteering. Is that a lever that you consider to foster inclusivity and more social impact in your companies?
What policy? HR?
Like volunteering, like volunteer time off, for example?
So we put a change in, so we have even for we had it for salaried workers, but now for hourly workers, they get 8 to 16 hours of paid time for volunteerism. We'll match their donations. And I know I keep coming back to the same theme. Having jobs in your community let you participate as volunteers. So your employees, I talked to one, he can now drop his daughter off in the mornings as opposed to having a 2-hour commute, right? You can be active in kids' sports, in schools, in your church, but volunteerism is a key component in, for us, everywhere we do business. You want to be a good part of the community and encourage your employees to give back.
Yeah, same thing in our company. We support and pay people to do volunteer work. Plus, if they want to donate money, we have company matching for those donations.
They're in the back there. In the black dress, yeah. Yeah, I see you.
Hi, that's me.
Stand up though so we can see you, yeah. It's hard to
Hi, my name is Monique Mervin. I am a current Boost student, and I'm so thrilled for this conversation. So I was born in the Chatham community, and I was raised in Bronzeville. So two special places that I very much care about.
Are you moving to Austin?
We're
I'm gonna hit that next. So as a current student and someone who aspires to the C-suite one day, I know we talked a lot about the reinvestment in the communities that I come from, but could you talk a little bit more about the leadership track? So what does, I guess number one, my question is, what percentage of your leadership and board represents people who look like me or from my communities? And where would you aspire that number that you would like that to be? And also, what kind of pipeline do you imagine the future to look like? So what could someone like me aspire to be in your shoes one day?
Good question.
Yeah. So what I would say, I try and get down to Chatham to meet with the new employees. And virtually every class I talk to, I get that same question from people who are starting on the phones. How do I get to be CEO? And that makes me really excited because we have had people start on the phones and move up to the management committee level to, having thousands of people working for them. One of the things we do is we pay for college tuition from day one. And what we found is tuition reimbursement isn't good enough because that only works if you have the money to pay for tuition and then get it reimbursed. So we pay dollar for dollar up front. We have set targets for people of color to be, it varies by area, but 25 to 30% across every level. And that's what we focus at the board level too, and part of our view on diversity. But there's nothing like having a better, pipeline and more people coming in at the bottom of the pyramid. And while they may start in call center jobs, as I said, we're already expanding to technology, to HR, and over time, hopefully my next, one of our future CEOs is already working for us in Chatham.
Anyone else want to speak to that?
I'll just skip all the red tape and say, send me your resume.
Exactly.
That's right. Good move. Any other students want to follow that? All right. I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions. You wanted to get in here. There's a gentleman here, then here. He had his hand up raised for a while.
Gil already stole my thunder with the improvements in that, the fiber. We need that. Every single household in Illinois must have fiber internet for us to be competitive. So, which leads into my next question, since you answered my first one. We've had a number of companies leave Illinois. Caterpillar down the street from you, Roger, Boeing, Citadel. Allstate sold its headquarters. We don't know what's going to happen there. Baxter has its headquarters for sale. So my question for you gentlemen is the following. What, for you as CEOs, what can Illinois do to make it easier for you to do business so that we start attracting new companies and, this narrative changes? I think that's the big question because that lifts everybody's boat.
Well, I'm Illinois Toolworks, so we're not going anywhere. I don't really. I can't afford the letterhead change. So I'll
Comment too. I can't.
I'll defer to these gentlemen.
I can't pick up and go. But let me tell you what we're doing as comment to help attract and retain businesses. Number one, operational excellence. Most of you probably know we are the most reliable utility in the United States last year, right? We were also voted to be the most resilient utility. Most of the electricity we deliver is carbon-free already because of all the nuclear plants in northern Illinois. I would say the only place who can claim something like that probably is the state of Washington because they have a lot of hydro power. But we're reliable, we're clean, and our average residential rates were actually one of the lowest in the country. So we're also affordable. We are becoming the data center, for example, data center capital in the US. Used to be Virginia, the utility there, Dominion, they couldn't accept more data centers load anymore. And so they're all coming to Illinois. And those are big time investments, Meta, Microsoft, and others. And they come because we're reliable, we have clean energy, and we're affordable. So that's one way for us to, at least from ComEd, to help in the attraction and retention of businesses here.
Yeah. It might be an easy answer, but I would say for the city and state, it's more, you do your job and we'll do ours. We don't want any business help. Sort out the budget, work on crime, but this is an amazingly attractive city. The other thing that, especially with our hosts here, the academic community, if you take Chicago and the institutions here, but then broaden it to Michigan, Wisconsin, Purdue, Indiana, all those kids want to come to Chicago. And so the talent, we started...
University of, you mean?
Yes, exactly. Well, anyone living in those states would rather be in Chicago. We started an analytics program. You have to come to the office. You had to move to Chicago. We had 1,100 applicants for 70 spots. So I think, we can do our part. It's a shame some of those companies left, but I think we need to do a better job telling the story of what a great place this is to do business. And other companies will come.
Great point. I promise you to get in here, and then you'll be the last question. This gentleman here in the tie. If you wear a suit to this, you got to get a with
a tie.
Wait till next meeting. You'll see him.
I think you're the only guy with the suit and tie, so we had to give you a shot.
Thank you. I'm very pleased that you're in Chatham. I grew up there, so that's awesome to see. But I sell commercial appliances, so my question is for Scott. Do you see your dealer network for premium brands like Hobart as a leverage point to create economic development?
Yeah, there's no question about it. We are. This is a bit of an inside baseball question. So we own about 1/7 of our company is commercial food equipment. So cooking, dishwashing, refrigeration inside universities, hospitals, hotels. We're working on have been working on a similar program to what Gil referenced earlier. So we have 1,500 service techs in the country that are servicing our equipment for restaurants and hospitals and hotels. And so we are doing some specific things in terms of non-college degree recruiting, training, development. And we haven't necessarily connected those through the dealer network yet, but ultimately, once we get our own sort of methodology, these are again high wage, high benefit, well above sustaining wage kinds of jobs. Take a little bit of technical skill, but as we are working on sort of centers where we can recruit people for these roles and partnering with local community colleges in terms of supplementing some of the training they need to be able to be effective later on and all that. The ultimate thought is that we then multiply that by a factor of 10 if we bring our dealer network in. So once we have a good model there, and that's just certainly one example. But yeah, we have local dealers representing our products all over the country, and so from the standpoint of their choices they make in terms of who they do business with, there's certainly ample room for coordinated effort around how can we broaden our the participation of diverse minority-owned businesses in our ecosystem. Again, Roger.
This is the last question here.
So who's the company, by the way? You. Okay, wonderful.
You'll close us out.
All right, this is
That's pressure.
Yeah, Chris Kim here, student here at Booth. I have a few questions. The first one is I'd love to hear more data when it comes to the positive impacts that you guys have made in these areas that you've invested in. Curious about that. And then second question is, what incentives did you guys receive from the government to invest in the projects? The last one is, how can other companies be swayed into investing in underserved communities like the South Side and the West Side? Thank you.
We could have just come to you for the whole Q&A. All right, go ahead.
I can run through the three. We're working on measuring the broad economic benefit and actually are working with some academics around that. We think about jobs. So the primary metric is how many people are we employing? That's what I'm focused on. But in terms of, I don't know if it's 6 or 7, but there is a broader halo effect, and we're looking to capture as much of that. I would say we know we're benefiting the community because 85% of the people we hire work within 5 miles. So we're very focused on local. In terms of incentives, we got nothing from the state and something very small from the city. And that was partially by design. To Scott's point, there are plenty of things we think the city and state should be spending money on. Helping us is not one. But also, those programs are designed for competitive situations. We would have had to say, well, we're looking at Indiana or Illinois, and that wasn't it. We were only looking here. And so we probably wouldn't have qualified for anything in terms of that. Now I can't remember, what was the third one? How do we get other people? Again, what I said earlier, having them come see it, but also telling the business story, right? It can't be just hey, we're doing the right thing, be inspired by us. Telling the business story as well as them seeing what it's doing for the community. I think that's where the real magic comes from.
Anyone else want to jump in on any of those three?
Yeah, in our case, we estimate that this clean energy transition between now and 2030 can have the potential of producing 40,000 net new jobs in our service territory. And, but a lot has to happen, right? Our own initiatives have been really, just like what's described here, we're trying to measure the broader economic impact. No government subsidies. We are regulated, so in some cases we will be able to recover the cost of the initiatives. What will be a game changer for the energy industry, especially utilities, is the IIJA, the infrastructure legislation at the federal level, and the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of money that are going to be given to states and to companies like ours to invest in clean energy and infrastructure. So that is to come, and we have applied for some of those available funds. For example, on the broadband, middle mile broadband, we call it, that there's some matching funds so we can scale faster in doing those projects.
Great.
And maybe I'll just add on the issue of why aren't more people doing it. I think, this is a sort of a hard thing for me to say, in that I come from a company where, we believe in pushing decision making close to the customer. We're very decentralized. There are at least 50,000 people at my company that would say I'm just a figurehead and don't really add much value day to day. But I think in this context, I think what a lot of companies don't appreciate yet is there's a lot of friction, right? There's a lot of reasons not to do this, just because, and Roger hit on it, I think, early on. And so I do think part of the story we have to tell is how personally involved we got in terms of pushing through that friction, because these are good business decisions, but there are plenty of options with less, that are frictionless relative to this, right? And so I think most big companies, you have departments that are responsible for sourcing or site selection is, I think, the example you used, Roger, and I think, we only start to, sort of build momentum here when somebody with the actual sort of authority to cut through a lot of those traditional thought processes and say, look, we're just going to do this, and we're going to learn. And I think that's probably part of what ultimately builds some momentum is we have to educate our peers on, look, you really want to do this, you can't outsource it to the whatever department. It's going to be something that you're going to have to lead from the front on.
Yeah. I like what Roger said earlier. You have to inspire, right? Inspire a shared vision. And what your employees, your board, your stakeholders and peers. I think that word "inspire," a shared vision, is important.
Well, that's a great way to end it, and I would say for all of us, this was an inspiring panel. You guys did a great job.
Thank you. Many thanks, Derek. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. This was a terrific discussion. And as I think about one of the themes, you talked about the ecosystem quite a lot. And I would also answer your question about what can we do to propel more activity like this. And I think one thing we can do is just own the part that just by being here, doing the work you do, being the student you are, that you are part of the ecosystem. So that's going to help propel us forward. So thank you. On that note, I invite you to stay connected to the Restandi Center. If you're not already getting email from us, then sign up for our emails on our website. Please join us at our next Innovating for Social Equity event in April, and please stick around. We've got some refreshments, so be part of the ecosystem that you are, and I look forward to connecting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.